Canada was not expected to make noise in Davos. The assumption was that it would arrive quietly, deliver safe remarks, and move on. Commentators believed Ottawa had already pushed too far. Behind the scenes, political insiders suggested the timing was wrong. Challenging American pressure in the current climate was seen as unnecessary risk. Financial outlets predicted caution, not confrontation. The consensus was straightforward. Canada would soften its position, recalibrate its language, or simply be overlooked. That is how middle powers usually behave when pressure mounts. They absorb it, they adjust, they wait for the moment to pass. But Davos did not follow that script. Instead, it became the moment that script stopped working. And what followed caught far more than Canada's critics off guard. In the days leading up to Davos, the pressure was real. Trade tensions with Washington were public. Tariffs were openly discussed. Questions around sovereignty and leverage were no longer theoretical. Historically, this is where smaller or mid-sized economies choose restraint. They avoid escalation. They seek compromise behind closed doors. Most observers assumed Canada would do the same, but Davos became the point where those expectations collapsed. When Prime Minister Mark Carney stepped onto the stage, there was no dramatic buildup, no personal attacks, no finger-pointing, but there was clarity. And that clarity immediately changed the room. This was not a defensive address. It was not an explanation or an apology. It was a declaration that the rules many countries were still pretending applied no longer did. The reaction was immediate, not gradual. Instant, because it became clear that Canada was not responding to pressure. It was redefining how pressure itself works. Carney did not accuse anyone. He did not posture or raise his voice. He stated something many leaders had avoided saying publicly. The old global order is not coming back. That single line reframed the conversation. He explained how economic integration, once marketed as cooperation, had become leverage. How dependence was now being used strategically. How one-on-one negotiations with dominant powers leave smaller nations structurally exposed. Then came the line that landed hardest. Middle powers should not negotiate alone anymore. They should negotiate together. This was not abstract theory. It was not academic language. It was a blueprint. The message was clear. Sovereignty is not preserved through compliance. It is preserved through coordination. This was not about opposing any single country. It was about ending a pattern, and everyone in the room understood the implications. Once middle powers stop acting individually, the balance changes. Europe responded first, and it did not hedge. Finland's president publicly praised the speech, calling it one of the strongest delivered that week. That mattered. Finland understands pressure, leverage, and proximity to power better than most. Estonia amplified the message. Sweden echoed it, not as commentary, but as endorsement. One European leader described the speech not as rhetoric, but as a manifesto for free nations facing coercion. Another referenced ending performative compliance. Stop pretending systems work when they don't. Stop signaling agreement simply to avoid conflict. Then NATO weighed in. The timing was impossible to ignore. As trade threats escalated and sovereignty debates intensified, the head of the world's most powerful military alliance publicly welcomed Canada back into a leadership role. Canada is back. That phrase was not symbolic. It was strategic. It signaled that Canada's stance was not reckless. It was stabilizing, values-driven, grounded. But the most unexpected reaction did not come from Europe. It came from inside the United States. Behind closed doors, the speech began circulating quietly, not for optics, for substance. American officials shared it internally. The reaction was simple. Wow, one U.S. governor later acknowledged that the transcript had made its way through internal channels. When a sitting American official publicly praises a foreign leader's conviction, the usual hierarchy shifts. Instead of setting the tone, Washington was listening. That discomfort showed. The response turned dismissive. Election messaging, noise, irrelevant. But dismissiveness often reveals more than confidence. Because when something truly doesn't matter, it's ignored. This wasn't. While critics mocked, alignment continued. Australia did not hedge. Its treasurer described the speech as thoughtful and widely discussed within government. Former leadership went further, urging similar language at home. We will not be bullied. That was not diplomatic phrasing. That was clarity. The warning followed quickly. Economic dependence is now a vulnerability. Mexico spoke next. Despite deep integration with the US economy, despite direct exposure to pressure, its president called the message timely and realistic. Opposition leaders echoed the sentiment. This was not symbolism. It was shared risk recognition. By this point, the pattern was undeniable. This was no longer about Canada defending itself. Mark Carney had given middle powers something they lacked: a framework. Not outrage, not resistance for its own sake, but what he called values-based realism. Cooperation rooted in law, shared interests, collective leverage, not fear. That phrase spread quickly because the math supports it. Middle powers control massive portions of global trade, energy, manufacturing, shipping, and finance. Individually, they are pressured. Together, they are impossible to sideline. Finland saw it through security, Australia through trade, Mexico through survival, Estonia and Sweden through democratic resilience. Even voices inside the United States recognized the logic quietly. This was not emotional, it was strategic. Economic integration had been weaponized. Dependence had been exploited, and pretending otherwise no longer made sense. Carney did not call for confrontation. He called for alignment. Negotiate together. Respond together. That is what changed the equation. Because when middle powers stop acting as isolated targets, leverage flips, tariffs lose impact, threats lose credibility. This moment mattered not because of applause, not because of headlines, but because a new instinct emerged. Sovereignty is not preserved through silence. Stability is not achieved through submission. This was not an anti-American coalition. It was something more disruptive, a coalition that no longer needed permission to act. Pressure campaigns rely on isolation, fear doing the work alone. Davos exposed the flaw in that logic. Canada responded with clarity, and clarity proved more disruptive than defiance ever could be. What happened did not end an era, but it made one thing unmistakably clear: intimidation no longer works the way it used to.